The cold was a living thing. It had claws that raked her skin and teeth that gnawed at her bones. Alara felt its bite in the raw, chapped skin of her hands, wrapped around the splintery wood of the sledge. Each pull was a fresh agony, a tearing of muscle in her thin arms and aching back. Snow crunched under her worn boots, the sound a dull mockery of warmth and hearths she would never know. The wind howled down from the frost-fang peaks, a familiar, hateful song. It whipped her threadbare cloak around her legs and stung her eyes until tears froze on her lashes. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low. A ghost in her own pack, visible only when there was a burden to be carried or a mess to be cleaned. Worthless. The word was a brand on her soul, seared there by 100 sneers, 1,000 dismissive glances. Her parents had been lost to the red thaw fever years ago, leaving her with no status, no protection. She was a stray, permitted to live on the scraps of the Blackwood Pack's mercy, a mercy that felt colder than the winter wind. The sledge caught on a hidden root beneath the snow. The jolt sent a shockwave of pain up her arms. She gritted her teeth, a small, desperate sound lost in the gale. She could not stop. Stopping meant failing, and failing meant no food. Hunger was a constant, gnawing companion, but starvation was a deeper, more final cold. Look at it, struggling like a half-drowned rat. The voice was sharp and cruel, laced with the casual arrogance of the privileged. Alara's head snapped up. Lyra stood a few paces away, flanked by two of her vapid friends. She was the Alpha's daughter, beautiful and venomous, wrapped in thick white furs that made Alara's own rags seem even more pathetic. Her silver eyes, so like her father's, glittered with malice. Alara bowed her head, making herself smaller. "Alpha daughter," she whispered, her voice rough from the cold and disuse. "Still hulling firewood, Omega?" Lyra purred, taking a step closer. The scent of pine and expensive soap wafted from her, a stark contrast to the sweat and grime Alara knew she was coated in. "You reek of desperation. It's pathetic." Alara said nothing. There was nothing to say. Arguing would earn her a slap. Silence would only earn her scorn. Scorn was the lesser of the two pains. Lyra's lip curled. "My father is considering sending the useless mouths out into the deep woods for the rest of the winter, to fend for themselves. You would be the first to go." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the dull ache of her body. The deep woods were a death sentence. No one survived them alone in the heart of winter. "Please," Alara breathed, the word torn from her against her will. She hated the sound of it, the weakness it betrayed. Lyra laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Please? You have nothing to offer. You are a drain, a shadow. You should have frozen long ago." With a flick of her fur-lined boot, she kicked a spray of snow into Alara's face. The cold shock of it stole Alara's breath. Humiliation burned hot in her chest, a painful, useless fire. Then, Lyra shoved her. It was not a hard push, but Alara was off balance, exhausted. She stumbled backward, her worn boot slipping on an icy patch. She fell hard into a deep drift of snow, the impact jarring her teeth. Laughter echoed around her as Lyra and her companions walked away, their figures quickly swallowed by the thickening snowfall. Alara lay there for a long moment, the snow seeping through her cloak, chilling her to the core. The fire in her chest sputtered, replaced by the familiar, hollow ache of despair. It would be so easy to just stay here, to let the cold take her, to finally be at peace. No. The word was a spark in the frozen darkness of her mind, a stubborn, defiant ember that refused to be extinguished. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. She would not die in a ditch like a piece of trash. With a groan, she pushed herself up. Her muscles screamed in protest. The cold was deeper now, a heavy weight pressing in on her. But the ember of defiance was burning hotter, fanned by a cold, quiet rage. She would live. She would survive this day, and the next, and the one after that. She would endure their scorn and their cruelty. She would live, if only to spite them. Gritting her teeth against the pain, she hauled herself out of the snowdrift. She turned back to the sledge, grabbed the rope with her numb fingers, and pulled. The wood groaned, but it moved. One step, then another. She leaned into the weight, her world shrinking to the crunch of snow, the burn in her lungs, and the single burning thought: I will not break. The sky, which had been a bruised gray, was darkening with alarming speed. The wind's howl rose to a shriek, tearing at her, trying to rip the very breath from her lungs. This was no longer just a storm. It was a blizzard, one of the white furies the elders spoke of in hushed, fearful tones. Panic, a frantic bird, began to beat its wings in her chest. The path back to the village was gone, erased by a swirling curtain of white. Every direction looked the same, a formless, roaring void. She was lost. The sledge felt like it was anchored to the center of the earth. Her progress slowed to a crawl. The cold was no longer just on her skin. It was inside her, turning her blood to slush. Her thoughts grew sluggish, her limbs heavy and uncooperative. She stumbled, her knee hitting a rock she could not see. Pain, white-hot and blinding, shot up her leg. She cried out, a thin, reedy sound that the wind snatched and tore to shreds. The sledge rope slipped from her numb fingers. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled. This is it, then. The thought was strangely calm, distant. This is where I die. Lyra would be so pleased. No, not like this. Abandoning the sledge, she began to crawl. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to move. The instinct for survival was a raw, primal thing, overriding the pain and despair. She crawled through the blinding snow, her hands raw, her bad leg dragging behind her. Her searching hand found not snow, but empty space. She pitched forward, tumbling down a short, steep embankment and landing in a heap at the bottom. The fall knocked the last of the air from her lungs. For a moment, she lay still, a broken doll in the snow. But the wind was weaker here, shielded by an outcropping of black rock. A cave. It was not much, a shallow overhang barely deep enough to offer shelter, but it was something. It was a chance. With the last of her strength, she dragged herself toward the dark opening. As she neared it, a new scent cut through the sterile cold of the storm. It was coppery and sharp. Blood. And something else, something wild and powerful, like ozone after a lightning strike. Just inside the mouth of the small cave, half buried in a drift of snow, was a body. It was a man. A giant of a man, built on a scale she had never seen before. He was sprawled on his back, a dark, jagged tear in the side of his black leather armor. Blood, a shocking crimson against the snow, stained the ground around him. One of his massive hands was clenched around the hilt of a sword that lay beside him, its blade shattered. Fear coiled in her stomach. A wolf? A rival pack? But then her eyes caught a glint of metal on his pauldron. It was a sigil, etched in silver. A snarling wolf's head crowned with 3 stars. The Alpha King. Alara's breath hitched. Kaelin. the supreme leader of all the northern packs, a figure of legend, a warrior whispered to be more myth than man, an ancient power who had ruled for centuries. Her own pack was nothing but a tiny, forgotten vassal in his vast kingdom. He never came to these remote territories. What was he doing here? Alone? Injured? A tremor of pure terror went through her. If his enemies had done this to him, what would they do to a worthless Omega who stumbled upon the scene? She should run, flee into the storm and take her chances. But she could not move. Her gaze was fixed on his face. Even slack and pale in near unconsciousness, it was a face of harsh, predatory beauty. High cheekbones, a strong jaw dusted with dark stubble, a mouth that looked like it was carved for commands and snarls. His long, dark hair was matted with snow and blood. He was dying. The black, spiderweb-thin veins spreading from the wound on his side told her it was poisoned. And despite the terror, despite every instinct screaming at her to save herself, something else stirred within her. A strange, inexplicable pull. A resonance in the deepest part of her soul that she had never felt before. She could not leave him here to die. She did not know if it was pity, or a fool's sense of duty, or some madness brought on by the cold. She only knew she could not. The decision settled in her heart with a strange, quiet finality. With a grunt of effort, she grabbed the collar of his heavy armor. He was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of muscle and steel. Her own body was a symphony of pain, her torn knee screaming, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. "Come on," she grunted, her words puffs of white in the frigid air. "You are not dying here." She pulled. Her boots slipped in the bloody snow. She fell to her knees, but she did not let go. She dug her fingers into the frozen ground, using the rock face for leverage, and pulled again. Inch by agonizing inch, she dragged the colossal form of the Alpha King out of the driving snow and into the relative shelter of the cave. Finally, he was inside. She collapsed beside him, panting, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The blizzard raged outside, a wall of roaring white, but in their small pocket of rock, the world was suddenly, intensely quiet. It was just her and the dying king. Her hands trembled as she reached for the clasp of his armor. The metal was freezing cold, burning her fingertips. After a struggle with the unfamiliar mechanism, she managed to undo the pauldron and breastplate, pushing them aside. The leather tunic beneath was soaked with blood. Gently, she tore the fabric away from the wound. It was worse than she had thought. A deep, vicious gash, already inflamed at the edges. But it was the black veins creeping away from it that made her stomach clench. A poison she did not recognize, but she knew its purpose. It was designed to kill slowly, to bring down even the strongest of wolves. He needed pressure on the wound. He needed warmth. He needed a healer with powerful magic, none of which she had. She was no one, a nobody. What could she possibly do? Her self-doubt was a bitter taste in her mouth, yet she could not stop. She had to try. She tore a strip from the hem of her own tunic, one of the few intact pieces of cloth she owned, and pressed it against the gash. A low groan rumbled in the king's chest. His head moved restlessly from side to side. The cold in the cave was seeping into them both. He was losing too much heat. Shivering violently herself, she huddled closer to his large frame, hoping her own meager body heat could offer some small comfort. It was a pathetic gesture, a firefly trying to warm a mountain, but it was all she had. As she pressed down on the makeshift bandage, her hand slipped, and her bare palm made direct contact with the hot, fevered skin beside the wound. It happened in an instant. A bolt of pure, white-hot energy shot up her arm. It was not a burn. It was an invasion, a searing force that slammed into the center of her chest and exploded. A scream was ripped from her throat, sharp and raw. Pain, unlike anything she had ever known, blazed across the skin of her right wrist. It felt as if a blacksmith's brand was being pressed into her flesh, burning through skin and sinew and bone. The scent of ozone filled the small cave again, thick and electric. Through a haze of agony, she looked down at her wrist. A mark was forming there, etched in lines of incandescent silver light. It swirled and coalesced into an intricate, impossible design. A wolf, its head thrown back in a silent howl, framed by the blazing corona of a golden sun. It glowed with an inner light, pulsing in time with her frantic heartbeat. The man beside her gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. Alara's head snapped toward him. His eyes were open, and they were staring right at her. They were not the eyes of a normal man. They were the color of molten gold, shimmering with an ancient, impossible light. There was no confusion in them, no delirium from the fever. There was only focus, an intensity that pinned her in place, that saw through her rags, through her fear, through the worthless shell she presented to the world, and into the very core of her being. He did not look at his wound. He did not look at the storm. He only looked at her. His lips, chapped and pale, parted. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the rock floor and up into her bones. It was the sound of mountains grinding together, of deep thunder. "You're her." The words made no sense. Her? She was no one. A mistake. A piece of driftwood in the flood of the world. What was he talking about? Before she could process, before she could even breathe, he moved. His arm, which should have been weak from blood loss and poison, lifted with surprising speed. His large, calloused hand closed around her right wrist, his fingers wrapping gently but inexorably over the glowing, painful mark. The moment his skin touched hers again, a second shockwave went through her, but this was different. It was not pain. It was resonance. A deep, thrumming chord of rightness that settled the frantic panic in her soul, even as her mind screamed in terror. The searing pain in her wrist subsided to a warm, constant hum. His golden eyes held hers. His thumb stroked over the glowing mark, a gesture of possessive reverence. "Mine," he breathed. The word was not a question. It was a statement, a declaration, an ancient claim laid upon her soul. As he spoke, she saw it happen. The black, venomous veins on his chest flickered. Under the warmth of their joined hands, the poison seemed to retreat, pulling back from its creeping advance by a fraction of an inch. The bond, whatever it was fighting it. Then, his strength gave out. His golden eyes fluttered closed, his grip on her wrist loosened but did not release, and his head fell back against the stone. He was unconscious again. Alara was left in the sudden silence, her heart hammering, her mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. What was happening? What was this mark? What had he meant? Mine. Her instincts screamed at her to pull her hand away, to run, to flee this impossible man and the terrifying power that crackled around him. But she could not. His hand, even in unconsciousness, held her fast. And a deeper, more primal part of her, a part she never knew existed, did not want to run. It wanted to stay. It wanted to press closer, to feel the steady thrum of the connection between them. The blizzard howled on, sealing them in their stone womb. Alara stayed. She had to. For 3 days, as the white fury raged outside, she remained by his side. She was his prisoner, his anchor, and, impossibly, his only hope. She huddled against him for warmth, his large body a furnace against the biting cold. The bond was a constant, humming presence, a low thrum of energy flowing between them. It was a strange and terrifying comfort. She felt the slow, arduous battle he was waging against the poison in his veins. She felt his immense strength, his ancient weariness, and the loneliness so profound it made her own feel small in comparison. She found his pack, a leather satchel containing dried meat and a water skin. She forced herself to eat a little, then dribbled water between his cracked lips. He drank, still unconscious. The simple act felt monumental. She was no longer just surviving. She was keeping someone else alive. She was keeping a king alive. On the 3rd day, the wind died down. A sliver of pale light pierced the gloom of the cave. The blizzard had broken. Kaylin's eyes were open again. This time, they were clearer, the gold less fever-bright and more like warm honey. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. He was still weak, but the poison had receded further, the black veins now only a faint shadow around the healing wound. He shifted, trying to sit up. She immediately moved to help, pushing against his broad back. He allowed it, leaning against the cave wall with a low grunt of pain. "You stayed," he said. His voice was still rough, but stronger now. She just nodded, unable to speak. She felt small and grubby under his intense gaze. He held up the water skin. "Drink." "I am fine," she whispered. "Drink," he repeated. It was not a request. He watched her until she took a few sips, the simple act of his concern so foreign it felt like a physical blow. No one had ever made sure she drank first. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions. He kept looking at her, then at her wrist where the mark now lay dormant, a silvery, intricate tattoo against her skin. Then they heard voices. Shouts from outside echoing in the sudden stillness of the snow-covered landscape. "Over here! The tracks lead this way!" Alara's blood ran cold. It was Joran's voice, a brutish enforcer from her pack. A search party. They had found her. Relief warred with a sudden, sharp dread. Kaylin heard it too. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a predatory sound that made the hairs on her arms stand up. He tried to push himself fully upright, reaching for the hilt of his broken sword. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice all command. Before she could react, figures appeared at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the bright snow. It was Joran, his face a mask of suspicion, and 2 other pack warriors. And behind them, wrapped in her pristine furs, was Lyra. Their eyes swept the scene, the giant, injured stranger, the blood in the snow, and Alara, huddled beside him, looking like a cornered animal. Joran's eyes narrowed. "Omega, what is this? Who is this man?" he demanded, his hand resting on the pommel of his own blade. "He was injured," Alara stammered. "The blizzard." Lyra's gaze was sharper. It flicked from Kaylin's regal, though battered face to Alara's. She saw the way Alara instinctively tried to hide her right hand. With the chilling certainty of a predator spotting a weakness, Lyra's eyes locked onto Alara's wrist. "Show me your hand, Omega," Lyra said, her voice soft and dangerous. Alara froze. Kaelin let out another low growl, shifting to place himself more fully in front of her. "Touch her, and you die," he snarled, and even in his weakened state, the raw power in his voice made the pack wolves take an involuntary step back. But Lyra was not deterred. Her eyes were fixed on Alara, a horrifying dawning of comprehension on her beautiful face. She had heard the old tales, the legends of the fated mates of the Alpha Kings, of the soul bond that manifested as a claiming mark. "Joran," Lyra said, her voice barely a whisper, never taking her eyes off Alara. "Look at her wrist." Joran, confused, followed her gaze. Alara clutched her hand to her chest, but it was too late. He had seen the faint, silvery shimmer of the mark. He did not understand its significance, not like Lyra did, but he saw that something had changed. Lyra's face was a mask of shock, which quickly curdled into a look of such venomous, consuming jealousy that it stole Alara's breath. This worthless, filthy Omega. Chosen? By a man who radiated power even when broken and bleeding? It was an offense to the natural order of things, an insult, an opportunity. "He's an intruder," Lyra announced, her voice regaining its command. "A rogue. He attacked her. Joran, take her. We'll deal with him." "No!" Alara cried out. "He saved me!" Joran hesitated, looking from Lyra to the formidable man who was now struggling to his feet. "She is with me," Kaelin stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He stood tall, swaying slightly, but his golden eyes were chips of ice. Lyra laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. "She is our Omega. She belongs to the pack. Take her." To Joran, she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "That mark? It makes her valuable, Joran. Very valuable. Not to us, but to the King's enemies. The Ember Covenant would pay a fortune for the King's pet." Joran's eyes widened with greed. The Ember Covenant, a shadowy faction led by a rival Alpha who sought to overthrow Kaelin, was a name spoken only in fearful whispers. The reward for such a prize would be legendary. That was all the motivation he needed. "Take her," he barked at the other two wolves. They surged forward. Kaelin roared, a true Alpha's roar of fury and possession, and swung his broken sword. He was still too weak. They dodged him easily. One of the warriors grabbed Alara's arms, hauling her back. "No!" she screamed, clawing at him. She looked at Kaelin, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't even know his name, yet the thought of being torn from him was an agony beyond imagining. Joran and the other wolf disarmed Kaelin, forcing him to his knees. He fought like a cornered god, but his wounds and the poison had stolen his strength. He could only watch, his face a mask of helpless fury as they dragged her away. "Alara!" Her name, torn from his throat, was a sound of pure anguish. It was the first time he had said it. Then they were dragging her out of the cave, into the blinding white snow. The last thing she saw was his golden eyes, burning with a promise of retribution, before they hauled her away. The moment they pulled her out of the cave, the world tilted on its axis. The separation was not just physical. It was a spiritual amputation. A vital part of her, a part she hadn't known she possessed until 3 days ago, was being ripped away. A scream of pure, soul-deep agony tore from her throat. It was a pain beyond any physical hurt. It was the pain of a soul being cleaved in two. The warm, thrumming connection to Kaelin snapped, replaced by a howling, freezing void. The cold of the blizzard was nothing compared to this. This was an absolute zero that extinguished all light, all warmth, all hope. She sagged in the warrior's grip, the fight draining out of her. The world dissolved into a gray haze of pain. She was vaguely aware of being half dragged, half carried through the snow, back toward the pack village. Lyra's triumphant face swam in her vision, distorted by her tears. Back in the village, she was not taken to the communal hall. She was thrown into one of the punishment cells beneath the Alpha's lodge. A small, dark, stone-walled room that stank of fear and damp earth. Joran followed her in. "Give me no trouble, Omega," he snarled, and his hands were rough as he bound her wrists in front of her. The ropes were not ordinary hemp. They were laced with thin, gleaming strands of silver. The moment the silver touched her skin, the mark on her wrist erupted in fresh agony. It was a cleansing fire, a holy burn designed to sever unnatural bonds. It didn't just hurt her skin, it attacked the connection itself. The faint, distant ember that was Kaelin flickered violently, threatening to be extinguished altogether. She cried out, doubling over from the pain. Joran grunted, satisfied. "That should keep you quiet." He slammed the heavy wooden door shut, the bolt sliding home with a sound of finality. She was alone in the dark, with nothing but the searing pain on her wrist and the terrifying emptiness in her soul. The bond was a screaming nerve ending, frayed and burning. Through it, she could feel a distant, mirrored agony. His agony, his rage. They were hurting him by hurting her. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time had no meaning in the darkness. Her world was reduced to the gnawing cold, the fire on her wrist, and the gaping wound in her spirit. Then, the door opened again. It was not Joran. The figures who entered were tall and slender, wrapped in cloaks that seemed woven from shadow and smoke. They moved with a silent, unnatural grace. Their eyes glowed like the embers of a dying fire. The Ember Covenant. Lyra had not wasted any time. They said nothing. One of them produced a black sack. Before Alara could even scream, it was pulled over her head, plunging her into a world of suffocating darkness. They lifted her as if she weighed nothing and carried her out of the cell. She felt the cold night air, heard the crunch of snow, and then the creak of a wagon. She was thrown unceremoniously onto a pile of what felt like rough furs. The wagon lurched into motion. The Blackwood Pack, her home for her entire miserable life, had sold her for a pouch of gold. The journey was a blur of misery. The silver ropes burned constantly. The connection to Kaelin grew fainter and fainter, a tiny, sputtering candle in a hurricane. Sometimes she thought it was gone completely, and the despair that followed was so absolute, so crushing, that she wished for death. They arrived at a fortress. It was not a place of wood and stone like the pack villages. This was a citadel of twisted black rock that seemed to drink the light from the sky. Cold fire, a sickly green, burned in braziers along its ramparts. This was a place of dark magic, a wound on the face of the world. She was dragged through cold, echoing halls to a vast chamber. They ripped the sack from her head. The room was circular, the floor covered in a complex array of runes carved into the black stone. In the center, a stone altar stood, chains hanging from the ceiling above it. A man stood waiting for them by the altar. He was tall and strikingly handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with hair the color of polished jet and eyes that held the same unsettling ember glow as his soldiers. He smiled as he saw her, a slow, chilling expression that held no warmth at all.
"So,
he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that slid over her skin like a cold blade. This is the little stray that has the great Kaelin tied in knots. I am Malachor, the Shadow King, the leader of the Ember Covenant, Kaelin's ultimate rival. He circled her like a wolf inspecting prey. You are less than I expected. Frail, frightened, and yet, you hold the key to his destruction. He gestured to the runes on the floor. This bond of yours, it is a remarkable piece of ancient magic. A conduit, a two-way street. He feels your pain, did you know that? Every moment you suffer in these silver ropes, he is weakened. His strength is sapped. His mind is clouded with your terror. Malachor leaned in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have designed a ritual. It will use you as a focus. We will not just sever the bond. We will invert it. All the power that flows through it, all the strength of his ancient line, will be funneled from him, through you, and into me. It will, of course, burn you out from the inside, a flame consuming its own wick, and it will leave Kaelin a broken, powerless husk, ready for me to finally claim his throne. Tears streamed down Alara's face. So this was it. She was not even a person to him. She was a tool, a key, a weapon to be used against the man she was inexplicably tied to and then discarded. Her life of worthlessness had led to this, a worthless death. His soldiers chained her to the altar, her arms stretched above her head. The cold metal of the manacles was a fresh torment. Despair, absolute and final, washed over her. She was going to die here, and her death would be the doom of the golden-eyed king. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sight of Malachor and his glowing runes. The pain was immense, a universe of agony. But it ignited in her chest, a desperate, defiant fire against the encroaching darkness. He was coming. She just had to hold on. The ritual began. Malachor stood before her, his hands raised. He began to chant in a guttural, ancient language, the words themselves seeming to writhe in the air like smoke. The runes on the floor flared to life, glowing with a malevolent crimson light. Pain, raw and elemental, slammed into her. It was the pain of the bond being forcibly unwound, of her very soul being torn apart thread by thread. A scream of pure agony was ripped from her, echoing in the vast, cold chamber. She felt a pulling sensation, as if her life force was being siphoned out of her, drawn toward Malachor. The distant connection to Kaelin wavered, a scream of mirrored pain echoing down the bond. She could feel his strength being drained, his fury turning to desperation. Malachor laughed, a triumphant, terrible sound. Yes, I can feel it. The power of the Alpha Supreme. It will all be mine, he roared, his eyes blazing. Alara's vision began to tunnel. The darkness was closing in. Hold on, Kaelin's voice echoed in her mind, but it was growing faint. She was failing. She could not hold on. And then, an explosion. It was not a sound, but a physical impact that shook the entire fortress to its foundations. The far wall of the ritual chamber disintegrated into a cloud of dust and shattered rock, and in the opening, silhouetted against the gray morning light, he stood. It was Kaelin, but not the weak, injured man from the cave. This was the Alpha King in his full, terrifying glory. His armor was gleaming silver, his long hair flying in the sudden wind. His eyes were not gold. They were blazing pools of pure silver fire, lit from within by a wrath that was ancient and absolute. Behind him stood his royal guard, a dozen warriors built on the same massive scale as their king, their forms shifting at the edges, hinting at the giant wolves that lay within. Malachor! Kaelin's voice was not a shout. It was a promise of death, a sound that cracked the very stones. The battle was instant and brutal. The royal guard crashed into the Ember Covenant soldiers, a storm of silver steel and raw fury. The chamber became a whirlwind of chaos, the clang of swords mixing with the snarls of wolves and the screams of the dying. Kaelin moved like a force of nature, a blur of silver and death cutting a straight path through the battle toward her. Every warrior who stood in his way was cut down without a moment's hesitation. His eyes never left her, burning with a desperation that mirrored her own. But Malachor was ready. He stepped forward to meet Kaelin, a blade of shimmering black obsidian appearing in his hand. "You are too late, old wolf," he snarled. "The bond is already weakening you. You have come here only to die." Their blades met with a clash that sent sparks flying. They were a whirlwind of motion, two ancient powers locked in a deadly dance. Kaelin was stronger, faster, but Malachor was right. The draining effect of the ritual had taken its toll. Kaelin's movements were a fraction slower than they should have been. Malachor pressed his advantage, his obsidian blade weaving a web of dark energy. He landed a glancing blow on Kaelin's shoulder, drawing blood. Kaelin grunted, stumbling back a step. Alara could only watch, chained and helpless. She felt his pain as if it were her own. She felt his strength flagging. Malachor was winning. With a final desperate lunge, Malachor swept Kaelin's legs out from under him. The Alpha King fell to one knee, his silver eyes blazing with defiance, but his body failing him. Malachor stood over him, his chest heaving, a triumphant, savage grin on his face. He raised the obsidian blade high, preparing for the final, killing strike. "No," Alara whispered. The word was a choked, broken sound. Seeing Kaelin there, kneeling, about to die for her, something inside her shattered. It was not her spirit. It was a cage. A cage built of years of abuse, of being told she was worthless, of believing she was nothing. The pain of the ritual, the terror of her capture, the desperate hope of his arrival, and a fierce, possessive love that she hadn't even had time to name. It all converged in that single, horrifying moment. No. The word was not a whisper this time. It was a silent, internal roar that shook the foundations of her own soul. A scream tore from her throat, but it was not a sound of pain or fear. It was a sound of pure, unrestrained power. And with it came the light. A wave of pure, brilliant gold erupted from her body. It was not fire, it was not force, it was life itself, concentrated and unleashed. It was the warmth of the first sunrise after a long winter, the impossible green of the first shoots of spring, the cleansing purity of a mountain spring. The golden light slammed into the silver chains holding her. They did not break. They melted, turning to molten slag that dripped harmlessly to the floor. The crimson runes of Malicor's ritual were scoured clean, vanishing from the stone as if they had never been. The light washed over the chamber. The shadow-cloaked soldiers of the Ember Covenant shrieked as it touched them, their forms dissolving into wisps of black smoke. It swept over Kaelin, and she felt through the bond as his wounds knitted shut, his strength surging back in a massive, overwhelming tide. And it slammed into Malicor. He screamed, a high, piercing sound of utter agony. He dropped his obsidian blade and staggered back, clutching at his face. The pure, undiluted energy of life was anathema to his shadowy nature. It burned him in a way no sword ever could. The wave of light subsided, leaving Alara standing free, bathed in a soft, golden aura. She was no longer the shivering, terrified Omega. Her ragged clothes seemed inconsequential. Her stance was straight, her head held high. Power, a deep and ancient well of it she never knew she possessed, hummed beneath her skin. She took a step toward the staggering, whimpering form of Malicor. Her bare feet made no sound on the stone floor. "You called me a tool," she said. Her voice did not tremble. It rang with the clarity of a silver bell, filled with an authority that silenced the remaining sounds of battle. "You thought I was worthless." Malicor stared at her, his ember eyes wide with terror and disbelief. What are you?" he rasped. Alara raised her hand. Light, a blindingly bright sphere of it, gathered in her palm. It did not feel hot or destructive. It felt absolute. "I am the dawn," she said, her voice soft yet carrying to every corner of the ruined chamber. "And your night is over." She did not throw the light. She simply opened her hand. The golden energy flowed from her, a gentle, inexorable river. It enveloped Malicor. He gave one last, choked scream, and then he was gone. Not burned, not blasted, simply unmade. Dissolved into nothing but a shower of fading golden motes and a faint, lingering echo of shadow. The golden aura around Alara faded. The immense power that had surged through her receded, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. The strength went out of her legs and she swayed, the world turning gray at the edges. She did not fall. In a heartbeat, he was there. Kaelin. His arms, strong and solid, wrapped around her, pulling her tight against his chest. He held her as if she were the most precious, fragile thing in the universe, burying his face in the curve of her neck. He was trembling. "Alara," he breathed. Her name was a prayer, a vow, a sound of such profound relief and reverence that it brought tears to her eyes. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. His eyes were no longer silver fire, but the warm, molten gold she remembered, and they were filled with an awe that shattered the last of her self-doubt. "You are magnificent." She could only stare at him, her heart too full for words. He was real. He was here. They were safe. His gaze dropped to her right wrist. The mark, which had burned with silver and then gold, was now a calm, intricate pattern on her skin. He lifted her hand with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man so large and powerful, and he pressed his lips to the mark. A jolt of pure bliss shot through her. The bond, which had been a source of such agony, now flared with a warmth that spread through her entire body, healing the last vestiges of pain and despair. The silver wolf and golden sun on her wrist blazed with a soft, steady light, and as he held his lips there, a matching light flared on the back of his own hand. She watched, breathless, as the same intricate mark, the howling wolf, the blazing sun, burned itself into his skin, a perfect mirror of her own. The bond was no longer a one-way claim. It was a circuit, whole, complete, and eternal. He lowered their joined hands, a look of profound wonder on his face. "Now," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion, "you have marked me." He met her eyes, and the love she saw there was so vast, so ancient and unconditional, it took her breath away. "My queen." He swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. As he turned and carried her from the ruined chamber, the surviving members of his royal guard, their own battles won, dropped to one knee. They did not look at him. Their heads were bowed to her. They journeyed back not to the miserable village of the Blackwood Pack, but to the heart of his kingdom. It was a city unlike anything she could have imagined. A place of soaring silver spires nestled in a valley of ancient, giant trees, where waterfalls cascaded down mossy cliffs and the air hummed with a gentle, peaceful power. He did not hide her away. He stood with her on a vast marble balcony overlooking a grand plaza filled with his people. Wolves of every color and rank had gathered, their faces turned upward. Kaelin held her hand tightly in his. He raised their joined hands for all to see, the matching marks on their skin glowing with a soft golden light in the afternoon sun. His voice boomed across the plaza, filled with a pride and joy that echoed from the surrounding mountains. "Behold your queen!" A moment of stunned silence, and then a roar of approval erupted from the crowd, a wave of sound and emotion that washed over her. They were not just cheering for their king. They were cheering for her. Alara looked out at the sea of faces, at the kingdom that was now her home. She looked at the man beside her, the Alpha King, her mate, whose golden eyes were filled with a love that promised forever. She was no longer Alara the Omega, the worthless, the invisible. She was Alara, queen of the northern packs. She was the dawn that had broken the longest night. She was no longer cold. She was no longer afraid. She was no longer alone. She was home.